Kendrick Lamar walked the streets, unrecognizable to anyone passing by. The world knew him as a Grammy-winning rapper, a voice for justice, and an icon in the music industry. But on this day, he wasn't Kendrick Lamar, the superstar. He was just another face among the crowd, blending into the reality that so many homeless people face every day. For months, Kendrick had been disturbed by the stories he had heard, accounts of police mistreating the most vulnerable in society. Instead of staying silent, he decided to act. His plan was simple yet powerful: to put himself in the shoes of those often overlooked. With ragged clothes, fake dirt on his skin, and a hidden camera tucked away, he transformed into someone the world usually ignores. His goal was not fame or recognition. It was to uncover the truth about how police officers treat the homeless. He wanted to see if the system, designed to protect, was failing those who needed help the most. Kendrick wasn't just stepping into a role. He was stepping into a reality many avoid acknowledging. This wasn't a performance. It was a mission to expose the truth and spark change. As Kendrick walked deeper into the streets, his determination grew. He was ready to face the unknown, to witness firsthand how the world treats those without a voice. What he discovered would shake him to his core. Do you believe this experiment will reveal the truth about how society treats the homeless? Share your thoughts in the comments and keep watching to see what happens next. Kendrick knew this wouldn't be easy. If he wanted to uncover the truth, he had to make his transformation as convincing as possible. This wasn't just a casual decision. It was a carefully planned mission to shine a light on a hidden reality. With that in mind, Kendrick began his preparation. He swapped his usual stylish outfits for clothes that were old, torn, and stained. He smudged fake dirt onto his hands and face to match the appearance of someone who had been living on the streets for a long time. To complete his disguise, he carried a small bag filled with random items and a cardboard sign asking for help. But Kendrick didn't stop at appearances. To capture every moment of his experience, he equipped himself with a hidden camera. This small yet powerful device would allow him to document the raw, unfiltered interactions between himself and the world around him. Next, Kendrick chose the perfect location for his experiment: a busy urban area known for frequent police patrols. It was a place where the reality of homelessness was unavoidable. By positioning himself there, he knew he could observe how both the public and law enforcement treated someone society often ignored. His transformation was complete, and his plan was set. All that was left now was to step into the shoes of the vulnerable and see the world from their perspective. With his disguise in place, Kendrick stepped into the streets, ready to blend in and face reality. The area he chose was a busy urban intersection, surrounded by towering buildings, busy shops, and sidewalks filled with people rushing to their destinations. The constant hum of traffic, honking horns, and the occasional chatter of pedestrians filled the air, creating an overwhelming yet familiar city atmosphere. As Kendrick found a spot near the corner, he unfolded his small cardboard sign. The simple message read, "Please help." It was short and direct, just like the signs carried by so many others struggling to survive. He positioned himself against a weathered wall, carefully observing the people around him. Most pedestrians avoided eye contact, walking past him as if he were invisible. A few glanced in his direction but quickly looked away, their discomfort evident. Kendrick noted how the world around him seemed to move on, indifferent to his presence. The weight of their indifference was heavy, but it only strengthened his resolve to continue the mission. In the midst of this busy scene, police officers patrolled the area regularly. Kendrick saw them passing by in pairs, their radios crackling with updates. Their presence was routine, but Kendrick couldn't ignore the tension in the air whenever they appeared. He knew it was only a matter of time before they noticed him. The occasional sound of loose coins dropping into a cup or a brief glance from a passerby added to the mix of human behavior Kendrick was observing. For now, he waited, blending seamlessly into the homeless community, preparing himself for the interactions that were sure to come. Kendrick's mission had truly begun, and it didn't take long for the first officers to notice him. Kendrick had barely been sitting for an hour when two uniformed police officers began walking toward him. Their expressions were stern and their movements deliberate, as if they had already made up their minds about him before they even reached his corner. "Hey, you can't stay here," one of the officers said, his tone sharp and dismissive. Kendrick looked up, meeting their gaze briefly but said nothing. He kept his posture calm and unthreatening, playing the part of a man who had nowhere else to go. The second officer leaned in, scrutinizing Kendrick's sign. "What's this supposed to be? You can't be begging here," he scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. They didn't wait for an explanation. Instead, they continued questioning him, their words more accusatory than curious. Kendrick tried to respond, explaining that he wasn't causing any trouble and just needed a place to rest. But his words were met with mocking laughter. "Rest somewhere else," one officer sneered, pointing to a distant alleyway as if to say he didn't belong anywhere near the bustling streets. Then came the threat. "If you don't move along, we're going to have to make you," the first officer warned, his hand resting lightly on his utility belt. The implication was clear, and Kendrick felt the tension rising. The people around Kendrick noticed the interaction, but most avoided getting involved. A few glanced over nervously, but no one said a word. A group of teenagers nearby whispered among themselves but didn't step forward. For Kendrick, this was exactly the kind of behavior he had hoped to document. The casual cruelty, the lack of empathy, and the unspoken rules that pushed people like him further into the shadows. Moments like this reveal so much about society. How would you react in Kendrick's position? Let us know in the comments, and stay tuned to see how this shocking encounter unfolds. While the officers continued their behavior, onlookers stood frozen, torn between concern and fear of intervening. The bustling energy of the street seemed to slow as people noticed the tense encounter unfolding in front of them. Some glanced over briefly, their eyes filled with curiosity or discomfort, but most quickly looked away, unwilling to get involved. A middle-aged woman walking her dog paused for a moment, her gaze fixed on Kendrick and the officers. She hesitated, as if debating whether to step in, but eventually moved on, shaking her head. A group of teenagers whispered among themselves, pointing in Kendrick's direction, but they too chose to stay on the sidelines. It was a pattern Kendrick had noticed before. People saw what was happening but didn't want to interfere. Kendrick remained calm through it all. His expression didn't change, and he didn't retaliate or argue with the officers. Instead, he silently recorded everything, his hidden camera capturing not only the officers' harsh words, but also the indifference of those around him. He knew this moment wasn't just about the police, it was about society as a whole and how it responded to the vulnerable. The silence from the crowd spoke volumes. For Kendrick, it was a confirmation of the unspoken rules he had come to test. As the officers continued their confrontation, he focused on staying composed and gathering as much evidence as possible. What would you have done if you had been there? Would you have spoken up or kept walking? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned to see what happens next. Then, just when things seemed to escalate beyond control, a new player entered the scene. The officers had grown visibly frustrated with Kendrick's calm demeanor. One of them bent down, grabbing the small bag of items Kendrick had placed beside him, and carelessly tossed it onto the sidewalk. "You can't just sit here and make this place look bad," the officer snapped, his tone sharper than before. The other officer joined in, nudging Kendrick's sign with his boot as if it were garbage. "You've got 10 seconds to move," he said, his hand hovering near his utility belt. The threat was unmistakable. The tension between Kendrick and the officers was thick, drawing a few more curious glances from passers-by. As the situation intensified, a third officer approached the scene. He walked with purpose, his face set in a serious expression. At first glance, he seemed ready to support his colleagues, but as he got closer, his steps slowed. His eyes scanned Kendrick, taking in his face, posture, and even the way he remained unflinchingly calm under pressure. Then it happened. recognition. The third officer froze for a moment, his brows furrowing as if trying to confirm what he was seeing. He leaned in toward one of the other officers, whispering something that made them both pause. Their confidence wavered, replaced by subtle confusion. The third officer stepped back, glancing at Kendrick with a knowing look, though he said nothing more. The shift in energy was immediate. The officers, once so commanding, now seemed uncertain, their demeanor less aggressive. Though they didn't know exactly what was happening, Kendrick knew the balance of power had just shifted in his favor. What happened next left everyone speechless, especially the officers involved. The third officer, now standing close to Kendrick, turned to his colleagues and quietly muttered something that immediately caught their attention. At first, the other two officers looked confused, their brows furrowing as they tried to process what they had just heard. But then, slowly, the realization dawned on them. "That's Kendrick Lamar," the third officer said in a hushed voice, loud enough for only his partners to hear. The name seemed to hang in the air, changing the entire energy of the situation. The once confident officers now stood frozen, their expressions shifting from authority to shock. One of them took a step back, glancing down at Kendrick's torn clothes as if trying to reconcile his appearance with the name they had just heard. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the faint chatter of the city around them. Then came the awkward attempts to backpedal. "We were just doing our job," one officer stammered, his voice suddenly lacking the confidence it held moments ago. The other quickly added, "We didn't mean any harm. It's just protocol." Kendrick remained calm, watching them carefully as they fumbled for excuses. He didn't need to say anything just yet. The power of the moment spoke for itself. The officers who had been so quick to judge him were now stumbling over their words, unsure of how to navigate the sudden shift in power. This moment changed everything. If you're just as shocked as the officers, hit that like button and share this video with others who need to see this. Now that the truth was out, Kendrick wasn't going to let this slide. Slowly, he stood up, meeting the officers' uneasy gazes. Then, to their astonishment, he began removing his disguise. The ragged clothes, the dirt on his face, and even the cardboard sign, it all came off. What remained was unmistakably Kendrick Lamar, one of the most recognized and respected voices in music and activism. The officers froze, their earlier confidence completely gone. Before they could say anything, Kendrick reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. "This," he said, holding up the hidden camera, "has been recording everything." His voice was steady, calm, but filled with purpose. He didn't shout or accuse. Instead, he began to speak about dignity, justice, and accountability. "This isn't about me," he said, looking directly at the officers. "This is about how people like me. People without power or influence are treated every single day. You judged me without knowing who I was, and that's a problem." Kendrick's words were not just directed at the officers, but to everyone within earshot. He spoke about the responsibility of those in authority to protect, not demean, the vulnerable. His message was clear: respect and empathy should not be reserved for the powerful. They should be given to everyone, no matter their circumstances. The officers tried to offer weak excuses, mumbling about protocols and misunderstanding the situation, but Kendrick didn't let them off the hook. He stood firm, reminding them that their actions reflected a system that needed change. "You're not just individuals," he said. "You're part of something bigger, and this behavior is why so many people lose trust in that system." This was more than a confrontation. It was a moment of accountability, a chance for Kendrick to use his platform to shine a light on injustice. And when the footage hit the internet, it went viral for all the right reasons. Within hours of Kendrick releasing the video, it was shared across social media platforms, generating millions of views and sparking heated debates. People from all walks of life weighed in, expressing outrage over the officers' behavior and applauding Kendrick's courage for exposing the truth. The video ignited a larger conversation about police conduct and the treatment of homeless individuals. Many viewers shared their own experiences, echoing the same patterns of neglect and mistreatment Kendrick had uncovered. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach and shining a national spotlight on the issue. In response to the overwhelming backlash, the police department was forced to act. The officers involved faced immediate disciplinary actions, including mandatory retraining and temporary suspension. A public statement was issued, acknowledging the inappropriate behavior and promising internal reviews to prevent similar incidents in the future. But the impact didn't stop there. Kendrick's initiative inspired others to take action. Community leaders and activists began pushing for reforms, demanding better training for officers and increased resources for the homeless population. Donations poured into local shelters, and petitions for systemic change gained thousands of signatures. This was more than just a viral moment. It was a movement. Kendrick's bold experiment became a catalyst for change, proving the power of one act to spark meaningful conversations and inspire collective action. Do you believe this experiment will lead to real change? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more impactful stories like this. But Kendrick didn't stop there. He turned this moment into a movement. Inspired by the public outcry and the attention his video had garnered, Kendrick took action to ensure lasting change. The first step was donating a significant amount of money to local homeless shelters. His contributions provided essential resources like food, clothing, and temporary housing for those who needed it most. Next, Kendrick began collaborating with city officials and community leaders. Together, they worked on implementing police reform policies aimed at fostering empathy and accountability. These included mandatory sensitivity training for officers and new protocols for handling interactions with vulnerable populations. Kendrick also pushed for more funding for outreach programs, ensuring that the homeless community had better access to social services and support. Beyond financial contributions and policy discussions, Kendrick used his platform to keep the conversation alive. Through interviews, public appearances, and even his music, he reminded the world that real change starts with awareness and compassion. His story became a rallying cry for individuals and organizations across the country, inspiring countless others to take action in their own communities. The movement he started proved that one act of courage could create ripples far beyond its initial impact. It wasn't just about holding the officers accountable. It was about showing the world what could happen when someone chose to stand up against injustice. If this story inspired you, share it with others and hit that notification bell for more stories that matter. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with dignity, no matter their circumstances.